She used to wake up knowing where she was needed. Not in a grand way, not with pride or applause, just a certainty that the day had a shape, and she had a place inside it. Her name was Elena, and for years her work life followed a simple logic. Effort led to income. Income led to stability. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. The pause didn't begin with doubt. It began with necessity. Her mother got sick first. Not suddenly, but in the slow, consuming way that turns appointments into routines and routines into full-time commitments. Elena tried to balance both at the start. She took calls from hospital corridors, answered emails between medication schedules, promised herself it wouldn't last long. Then the job changed, deadlines stopped bending, flexibility dried up. And one afternoon, standing in a hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant, Elena chose what felt unavoidable. She stepped away. At the time, it didn't feel like quitting her career. It felt like choosing her family, like choosing decency, like doing what someone had to do. She told herself she'd return once things stabilized. Medical needs became financial strain. Savings thinned, dependence crept in quietly, first as help, then as reliance. She moved into a life that required all her energy just to maintain. There was no space left to build anything new. Work became memory. Years later, when her mother no longer needed her in the same way, Elena found herself standing in a different kind of silence. The days were quieter now, but they weren't lighter. What had once been filled with obligation was now filled with uncertainty. That was when she opened her laptop. Not with excitement, with apprehension. She expected the listings to feel familiar. Instead, they felt foreign. Entire industries spoke in languages she hadn't learned. Tools she'd never used were assumed knowledge. Experience was measured in years without interruption, a timeline she couldn't offer. Her resume felt like evidence of something incomplete. She tried to rewrite it anyway, adjusted dates, softened gaps, changed verbs. Nothing made the pause disappear. Applications became rituals she didn't look forward to. She submitted them carefully, then waited with attention she didn't know how to release. Every silence felt personal. Every rejection felt final. At some point, she stopped telling people she was looking. It was easier to say nothing. The word formed slowly in her mind without anyone teaching it to her. Unemployable. It didn't sound dramatic. It sounded factual, like a diagnosis. You eventually stop questioning. She began to measure herself against the requirements she couldn't meet. Younger candidates, faster learners, people who hadn't stepped away. She imagined hiring managers skimming past her name, already certain. It wasn't just the jobs she feared she couldn't do.
It was the version of herself she no longer trusted. Still, something inside her resisted complete surrender. Late at night, after the house was quiet, she started opening tabs again, not applications, information. She watched tutorials she didn't understand the first time, took notes she wasn't sure she'd ever use. The learning felt clumsy, slow, often humiliating. Some nights she closed everything in frustration. Other nights, she stayed. Progress didn't announce itself. It showed up as familiarity, as less confusion than before, as recognizing a term she'd once skipped over. She applied again, this time knowing she might not be chosen, knowing the effort itself was the point. The rejection still came. The silence still stretched. But something had changed beneath that. She was no longer waiting to be rescued by confidence. She was practicing endurance of a different kind, the kind that asks you to stay present, even when nothing is guaranteed.
There were days she wanted to stop. Days she questioned whether the effort mattered at all. Days she resented the time she lost. But there were also moments, small, unremarkable moments, when she caught herself thinking differently. When she didn't immediately assume failure, when she imagined possibility without flinching. She didn't reclaim her career overnight. She didn't suddenly feel qualified. What she did was quieter. She stopped disappearing from her own future. She allowed herself to be a beginner again, not because it was comfortable, but because it was honest, because pretending she didn't want more had started to feel heavier than the fear of trying. Elena still doesn't know where she'll land. She still carries doubt, still hesitates before clicking submit. But the word unemployable no longer governs her movements. Not because it was proven wrong, but because she stopped letting it decide who she was allowed to become. She's healing.
You're not alone in this. Healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the quiet moment you choose yourself. Sometimes it's just breathing again. If this story touched you, subscribe for more, like and comment. We're in this together, softly, steadily. Thank you for being here.